The post-war cleverness of Cubism, pervaded by the irony of Dada and jazz, ties Picasso's 1921 Three Musicians to Stravinsky's Octet for Wind Instruments a year or so after. For the correlations of Picasso's classical delight and of his Guernica terror, the Stravinsky time sequence appears crossed. This dream of 1932, what would fetch daughter Maya from the vibrant new model Maria Teresa, looks toward Stravinsky's most pellucid reshaping of the classical, the 1940 Symphony in C. By 1934, Picasso's bullfight series was prophetically warming up with fascist Europe for the Guernica. But Stravinsky's tragic blast had come earlier, as in this Oedipus epilogue of 1927, before his classical lightning. Clearly, in the dialogue of abstract flight and earth return, Picasso plays an ambiguous role. Picasso, who within a year, 1923-4, had always the style choice of putting space together, as in this clown portrait of his son Paul, right, or of wrenching it apart, as in this post-cubistic birdcage, left, without any implied polemic of world loss or recapture. In Western history, however, the representational conquest has been no matter of indifference, but a reality of power. Let 5 boating scenes plot that odyssey. In Conrad Witt's 1444 miraculous draught of fishes, with Christ walking the waves and Peter sinking, Renaissance observation has taken its stand in sacred legend, which opens to the delight of the lake, shore, and mountains near the city of Geneva, a birth of nature in the miraculous, real by timeless suspension, everything mirrored in the water but the risen Christ. In our second, the ship is going to pieces on the rocks. It is Paul's shipwreck on Malta, closing the classical world, as the shipwreck of Odysseus had opened it. Acts, there arose a tempestuous wind, Euroclydon, and falling into a place where 2 seas met, they ran the ship aground, but the hinder part was beaten with the violence of the waves, and some on boards, some on broken pieces of the ship, they escaped all safe to land. But what fills Elsheimer's Shakespearean scene is the night violence of ocean. Othello, what from the Cape can you discern at sea? Winter's Tale, the ship swallowed with yeast and froth, as you'd thrust a cork into a hogshead. A world reel by Cartesian and apocalyptic ambivalence. In Longhi's 1760 duck hunting in the Venetian estuary, the sacred sanction has receded. Secular pleasure stands on its own. Even the shadowed heroic might it received from spatial formulation under religious war, as in Rembrandt, has lightened to the wit of the Salon century, though that comic ease holds the great claims of nature and man in the moderation of aristocratic propriety. With Mount's eel-spearing, the earthly hope has staked out romantic holdings in the new world. How quietly radiant the transcendental pervasion. Thoreau, the morning wind forever blows, the poem of creation is uninterrupted. If Longhi's 4 servants have been replaced by a black woman, she is the Queequeg who handles the gig, while the white boy paddles, prototype for Huck and Jim. Only a throb of sentiment hints how near we are to the breaking of Earth's overextended claim. What child of the Mississippi or Brandywine could rekindle such radiance today? Has not history itself imposed another search by making most of all in the New World that vulnerable ecology of individual wish and joy a laughter to the gods? It is by no mere caprice that when Paul Clay, 1923, took up the boating and spearing, day becomes such dream night as in Joyce's Anna Livia Plurabelle, published 1928, to be comprised in Finnegan's Wake. Can't hear with the waters of, the chittering waters of, flittering bats, field mice, bark talk. Can't hear with bark of bats, all the liffying waters of, my foose won't moose, my hoe head hauls. Tell me tale of stem or stone, beside the rivering waters of, hither and thithering waters of, night. Clay's quarry has gone surreal. See abstracts in a spaceless monitor of raised and lighted water which the hunting whimsy stabs. The war of representation has been fought in the probability field of the mind-invested globe. Wonder ye then at the fiery chase? Who can specify when the reasoned affirmation of world order reached its art peak? Contradictory dimensionalities blur the question. Yet we would not be far off if we should choose, from the century of Milton and Leibniz, Vermeer's masterpiece, The Studio, with the instrumental sonata then forming out of chromatic polyphony in Rosenmüller or this Buxtehude. Nor can the limit of the modern break with that humanly proportioned cosmos be defined, whether in the expressionist or futurist attack, in Dada or the surreal, or the extensions of the post-war abstract. Here one of Flavin's constructions with fluorescent tubes. So too with music. On what scale can we weigh the indeterminate abandon of Cage's electronic sound against his silence? To confirm around the 17th century that upland of spirit in form, take three landscapes as like in airy freedom as their time span admits of. This 1495 Dürer watercolor, this Claude Lorraine drawing about 1639, with the conscious pervasion of Saint-Amand, mon Dieu, que mes yeux sont contents de voir ces bois. This sunlit Monet of 1880, though chosen for some similitude of instinctive lightness, each remains a compendium of its period style. Dürer's observational discovery is suspended in the transpersonal gift of the Creed world, as sensuous a mystery as in the rondos of Josquin or this Brumel. Even in so light a wash, Claude asserts the noble formulation of the phenomenal, as in the mathematics of chordal harmony, Cavalli's blessed solitude, Beato chi può, its mood penetration by Descartes' universal knower, I think, therefore I am.
secret de mon cœur malade, je te dirai pour t'émouvoir une très ancienne ballade.
In Monet, as in Fauré, all that inherited spatial grandeur wimples toward the new evanescence, the great Miltonic moods thin to the personal poignance of an almost sobbing delight. Before and after, or geographically around the plateau of Europe from the 15th through the 19th century, lies a world more stripped to the timeless and spaceless, the primitive force of this 1100 Beatus commentary on the Apocalypse from Silos, in a Spain permeated by the Dark Age and Moorish. Does the royal mode of old Persian song preserve something of that faith frenzy? Such force erupts again after 8 centuries in the faith-hungry surfeit of self to expressionist and futurist thrill spasms. Bacchioni's 1912 study of his mother, or from the same year, Schoenberg's Pierrot Lunaire, Nietzschean Nilomanias. Yet where could human fulfillment have affirmed so far and no further, since already Goya's last possession of an 18th century enlightened order was reaching from its lace and powdered wigs to the liberation that would turn this festive meadow to a Napoleonic battlefield, a summons of which even Mozart felt the dissonant call. There was no stopping place from that to the sole risk of the wartime 40s, Messiaen's abyss of birds from the quartet for the end of time, with Rothko's slow swirl at the edge of the sea, closing his surreal apprenticeship just before he melted landscape to drowning color pools. Let 6 stations from the Goya picnic to the Rothko swirl trace the abstraction of the outward, the surrealization of the within. In Constable's Leaping Horse of 1825, how visionary I's vision has become. But there is also the inner eye, and from 1800 to now, it is as if those polar pairs of sight and dream had advanced together in revelational estrangement. Since time linked with Constable's observation, and from the same quarter of England, John Martin was continually transforming appearance into fantasy. Milton's Pandemonium, like Poe's Dreamland, I have reached these lands but newly, from an ultimate dim Thule, from a wild, weird clime that lieth sublime, out of space, out of time. After 1870, whatever dislocation of the outward was peaking to Van Gogh cropped out here and there. In Marseille, with the late works of Monticelli, this color impasto, under trees, by water's edge, as earth world, air world, water world, thorough hurled, as the bushy-bowered wood and marbled river of Hopkins' epithalamion, what is water, spousal love. While subjectivity itself, in Victor Hugo's The Snake, about 1866, draws from symbolist encroachment Baudelaire's Litanies of Satan, or Meredith's On a Starred Night Prince Lucifer uprose, its alienating core. With the turn to this century, Cézanne's studies of landscape and of human forms converge in those monumental still lifes called Bathos, this almost final one in London, whose solid geometry is no more Euclidean than that of Lobachevsky or Riemann, of Abbott's Flatland or Duhamel's Mount Analog. Over the same years, Munch, moving oppositely from inside out, nightmared the canvas to a symbolic confession. His jealous friend Zybrzewski, whose Eve wife Dany plucks for the artist the forbidden fruit. As a wave mounts up a shoal, the motions of abstract and surreal climb the slopes of the Great War, both cresting 1913 and 14, one in the papal collages with which Picasso and here Braque left, completed their cubistic analysis, a reduction of the physical beyond which, in a sense, art could not push on. At the same time, with Giorgio de Chirico, right, the depths of the subconscious poured out, as in Freudian dream. Could the disillusions and Kafka neuroses of war and post-war plumb a more haunted surreal? Without and within, we could almost affirm 1914 as the climax of experiment. Though if put to it, we could surely, in the tide of Dada, non-objective op and pop, which has seemed ever since to rise without limit all over the Western world, extend the dual sequence through Second World War to now. So one who had thought Chekhov, Shaw, and Chaplin had pushed heartbreak comedy all the way might yet be startled in Beckett and Ionesco by the fused schizophrenia of that laugh agony. But have not the Poles also fused in this ARP cutout about 1920, Bird in an aquarium? Can we call it abstract, and set against it as surreal the diverting flea circus of Miro's carnival, one of countless marvels in a field too complex to be ordered, much less clarified, though the professional analysts every year or so would attempt just that in ism-searching tomes on new directions in art? While all directions went on cross-breeding. 1941, West Coast Toby's linear multiplicity. This forms follow man. Abstraction loosened to a white writing, which mystically absorbs the surreal. Yet the same fusion can everywhere exhibit the other leaning. As, for a West Coast compliment to Toby, in Darrell Austin, this palette-knife swamp of Europa, lambent as the sphinx-haunted pools of Raintree County, he could see her pale form turning over and over in a slow spiral, floating away on green waters. Finally, with the post-war 50s, the New York school brought to simultaneous culmination on those huge canvases pushed by the vast resources of art speculation, opposites transcending the former poles, a color action of violent gesture, here de Kooning, Woman One, and a passive mystery of spaceless color space, Newman's The Way One, right. In the cross-section we have thus made, from Goya to abstract expressionism, it might seem that the whole drift of the modern, formal or romantic, was univocal, to dissolve all rational programs of man and world in an inebriation of the depths, non-objective or subliminal. If crisis was the cause, our misrule of the mind-invested globe, how could the trend be opposed? Though it cannot be denied that the period of between wars also witnessed a realism of material reattachment. What then, if that attachment soils its own material nest? Albright's 1927-30 Into the World There Came a Soul Named Ida was as sure as Miss Lonely Hearts to outrage all who thought such realism should be life-affirming. Let us risk the distortion of a simplifying schema. Divide the field into four. by an x-axis running left to right, as from abstract and surreal to real and representational. Across it raise a y, as from negation below to affirmation above. On this Cartesian plot, counterclockwise rotation will compass the art and politics from war to war. The fire rush of avant-garde stands left and above Delaunay's 1913 delight of sheer sun-circle energy. Below it, also abstract but negative, Picabio's 1917 amorous display toys with the machine mockery war and Dada had already made of modern vision. Below and to the right, Gropper revives earth-seated realism, although for mockery, this depression swipe at a senate of sleep and rant, of which it might be asked, if the intent is negation, why not negate objects as well? Any answering claim of social message must sweep us right and above, where programmatic realism asserts the imperative of its earth yea. This 1934 Russian communist portrait of Kirov. In this quadrant, right and above, art comes into danger. So in Curry's John Brown of Kansas, post-romantic indulgence of the will to power manifestly suggests, beside its Michelangelo Moses model, that heroism which, as Eliot said in Gerontion, fathers unnatural vices. How ominously that could be the case when at Storm Center Nazi rallying would require of every level, religion, politics, science, and art, the cheer of mass acclaim for the militants of reaction. Nothing more grimly enforces than Arno Brecker's preparedness, right, its overweening also measured against Michelangelo, the civic call of the David. Let Ernst Barlach, North German sculptor, friend of Käthe Kollwitz, attest the danger of that rocky narrows in the stream. In response to the First War, which Nietzscheans, even Rilke, hailed, Barlach's 1914 Avenger left, brandished the blade of biblical warning. Who take the sword shall perish with the sword. When such art exhortation, with Barlach's cult of peasant humanity, especially Russian, had thrown him into the solitude of Hitler's condemnation, this 1927 floating angel, right, to be destroyed by the Nazis and reconstituted after the war from a hidden caste, became his dying prophecy. God's messenger hung in sightless gloom over the human shore. Back to 1914. As the long-awaited First World War came to Europe, the also expected revolution was underway in Mexico, while Rivera was with Picasso in Paris. When the abstraction, which had affirmed by dislocation, took both impacts, who could say whether it stood now above or below, in the quadrant of yea or of nay, or if those opposites had merged? Of his 1914 Marine Fusilier, Sailor at Lunch, though Ribera would later assert, I believe my Cubist paintings are my most Mexican, or of the 1915 Zapata landscape, Guerrilla Fighter, it is probably the most faithful expression of the Mexican mood that I have ever achieved. His revolutionary compatriots might have judged, as of the microtone experiments of Mexican Carrillo, elitist imitations of international avant-garde. Whereas when Rivera took up 12 years later the painting of political and social frescoes for the post-revolutionary government, this school of agriculture myth of man facing the elements, earth, air, left, water, right, volcanic fire, With the machines of their mastery, the very child sparking an electric arc, he had obeyed the other imperative of monumental patriotic representation, as if we had gone from Carrillo's fractional tones to Chavez' folkloristic ballet on the Nahuatl sun cycles of the same four elements. At the same time, Orozco, though with more expressionistic attack, began his fresco celebration of national culture, which would climax 1939 in the vaulted auditorium of the Guadalajara orphanage. This Marxist vision of Cortez as armored machine, advancing in flames over mutilated Indians. Finally, Siqueiros, third of the great muralists, makes of his 1943 fist-advancing self a personal assertion of the whole Mexican revolutionary claim, the pathos of between-war realism raised to the partisan demand of Second War Crusade. In Russia, avant-garde came as a late flowering from a more primitive soil. With what vis inertia the snowy wonder of the Byzantine north held its own. Witness this 1065 church near Vladimir, altered through centuries, just such as Tolstoy's God folk would still have pilgrimaged to, with the old chant they would have sung. And like the Renaissance impassioned harmonization of that chant, the force of European revival spills into the ancient city of Novgorod, in this 1490 wall and 1600 bell tower, announcing Peter the Great. Curious that